Thomas Mitchell woke up before sunrise, just like he had every morning for the past 20 years. But this morning felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind had howled all night, or maybe it was the knot in his stomach that had been growing tighter with each passing day. His small farm in Nebraska was dying, and he knew it. He pulled on his old work boots and grabbed his coffee mug from the kitchen counter. The coffee was weak because they were trying to save money on groceries. Everything had to be stretched these days. His wife Linda was still sleeping, and he was glad for that. She needed her rest after all those doctor visits and treatments. The cancer was gone now, thank God. But the medical bills weren't going anywhere. Thomas stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sky was still dark, but he could see the first hints of light on the horizon. He had been walking his fields at dawn for years, but lately these walks felt more like visits to a graveyard. The corn that should have been tall and green by now was stunted and brown. 3 years of bad weather had nearly destroyed everything he had worked for. He walked slowly down the dirt path between his fields, sipping his coffee and trying not to think about the bank notice that had arrived yesterday. Another payment was due soon, and he didn't have the money. The drought had been brutal this year, and what little rain they got seemed to come at the wrong times. Last night's storm had been violent but brief, probably doing more damage than good. As he walked, Thomas remembered when his father had handed him the deed to this land. He was just 25 then, full of hope and big dreams. His dad had worked this same soil for 40 years before him, and his grandfather before that. 3 generations of Mitchells had made their living from this earth. Now it looked like Thomas might be the last. The path curved around a small hill, and Thomas could see the irrigation ditch up ahead. The water level was low, as usual. He made a mental note to check the pump later, though he wasn't sure it would make much difference. You can't pump water that isn't there. That's when he saw something that made him stop walking. At first, he thought it might be a pile of old clothes or maybe some trash that had blown in from the storm. But as he got closer, his heart started beating faster. It wasn't trash at all. It was a person. A woman, lying motionless beside the ditch. Thomas dropped his coffee mug and ran toward her. His boots splashed through the muddy ground as he hurried to reach her. When he got close enough, he could see that she was breathing, but just barely. Her dark hair was matted with mud and blood, and her clothes were torn and dirty. She looked like she had been through hell. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Thomas knelt down beside her, his hands shaking slightly. He had never been good in emergencies, but he knew he had to help. The woman's face was pale, and there was a nasty cut on her forehead. She must have hit her head when she fell, or maybe someone had hurt her. Thomas looked around, hoping to see someone who might know what happened. But there was nothing. Just empty fields stretching out in every direction. How had she gotten here? The nearest road was almost a mile away, and their farm was pretty isolated. People didn't just wander into their fields by accident. He gently touched her shoulder. "Ma'am, I'm going to help you. Just hang on." The woman's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she tried to say something, but no words came out. Then she was unconscious again. Thomas pulled out his cell phone with trembling fingers. The service was spotty out here, but he managed to get through to 911. "I need an ambulance," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found a woman in my field. She's hurt bad." The dispatcher asked him a bunch of questions about his location and the woman's condition. Thomas did his best to answer, but he felt helpless. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't know how to help someone who was this badly hurt. All he could do was stay with her and wait. While they waited, Thomas took off his jacket and carefully placed it over the woman. She was shivering, and her skin felt cold to the touch. He didn't want to move her too much in case she had broken something, but he couldn't just let her lie there in the mud. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. "Help is coming. Just hold on." Thomas found himself studying her face. She looked like she was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. There were worry lines around her eyes, and even unconscious, she looked tired. Really tired. Like she had been running from something for a long time. Her hands were soft. Not the rough, calloused hands of someone who worked outdoors. She was wearing a nice blouse under her torn jacket, the kind of clothes city people wore to work. Her shoes were expensive looking, though they were scuffed and muddy now. What was a woman like this doing in his field? The ambulance seemed to take forever to arrive. Thomas kept checking his watch and looking down the road, hoping to see flashing lights. The woman stirred a few times, but she never fully woke up. Thomas talked to her anyway, figuring that maybe she could hear him even if she couldn't respond. Thomas, he said, this is my farm. Well, it's supposed to be my farm anyway. Been in my family for 3 generations. Not looking too good these days, but it's home. He felt a little silly talking to an unconscious stranger, but it seemed better than just sitting there in silence. Finally, Thomas heard the distant sound of sirens. The ambulance was coming up the dirt road, moving carefully to avoid the worst of the ruts and holes. Thomas stood up and waved his arms to make sure they saw him. The paramedics jumped out and immediately got to work. They checked the woman's vital signs and asked Thomas questions about how he had found her. He told them everything he knew, which wasn't much. She had been there when he arrived, unconscious and injured. He had no idea how long she had been lying there or what had happened to her as they lifted her onto a stretcher. The woman's eyes opened again. This time, they stayed open long enough for her to look directly at Thomas. There was something in her expression that he would remember for a long time afterward. It wasn't just pain or confusion, it was fear. Deep, bone-deep fear, like she was afraid of something much worse than physical injury. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly that Thomas almost missed it. Then the paramedics were loading her into the ambulance and she was gone. Thomas stood there in his field, watching the ambulance disappear down the road. His coffee mug was still lying in the mud where he had dropped it. He picked it up and looked around at his dying crops, but somehow they didn't seem as important as they had an hour ago. He had found a stranger in his field, someone who needed help more than he did. For the first time in months, Thomas felt like he had done something that mattered. He had no idea that this morning would change everything, not just for him, but for the mysterious woman whose life he had just saved. Elena Rodriguez opened her eyes slowly, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights above her. Everything hurt. Her head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer, and her whole body ached in ways she couldn't explain. The smell of disinfectant and the steady beeping of machines told her she was in a hospital, but she couldn't remember how she got there. A nurse noticed she was awake and came over with a gentle smile. "Good morning, honey. How are you feeling?" The nurse's voice was kind, but Elena found it hard to focus on the words. Everything felt foggy, like she was trying to think through thick cotton. "Where am I?" Elena's voice came out as a croak. Her throat was dry and scratchy. "You're at County General Hospital," the nurse said, checking the machines around Elena's bed. "You've been here for 2 days. A farmer found you in his field and called for help. You had a pretty bad head injury." Elena tried to remember, but there were only fragments. She remembered running. She remembered being scared. She remembered the rain and stumbling through the dark. But how had she ended up in a field? And where was David? The thought of her husband made her stomach clench with fear. David! She had been running from David. The memory started coming back in pieces, like a puzzle being put together one fragment at a time. The argument. The way he had grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises. The way he had threatened her when she said she wanted to leave. She had finally found the courage to run, but now she was in a hospital with no money and nowhere to go. "Is there someone we can call for you?" the nurse asked. "Family? Friends?" Elena shook her head slowly. Her parents lived across the country, and David had made sure she lost touch with most of her friends over the years. He always said he was the only one she needed. "No," she whispered. "There's no one." The nurse looked concerned but didn't push. "Well, the man who found you has been checking on you. His name is Thomas Mitchell. He and his wife have been really worried about you. Would you like to see him?" Elena wasn't sure she wanted to see anyone, but she nodded anyway. A few minutes later, Thomas walked into the room, holding his hat in his hands. He looked nervous and tired, but his eyes were kind. "I'm glad you're awake," he said, standing awkwardly by the door. "I was worried about you. Thank you, Elena managed. For finding me, for helping me. Thomas shrugged like it was nothing. Anyone would have done the same thing. He paused, then added, The doctor says you're going to be okay. That's good news. Elena nodded, but she didn't feel okay. She felt lost and scared and completely alone. Where was she supposed to go when they released her from the hospital? She had left David with nothing but the clothes on her back, and those were ruined. Now, Thomas seemed to sense her worry. Listen, he said, I don't know what happened to you, and I'm not going to ask. But my wife Linda and we've been talking. We have a guest room that's not being used. If you need somewhere to stay while you figure things out, you're welcome to stay with us for a while. Elena stared at him in surprise. I can't do that. You don't even know me. Sometimes that doesn't matter, Thomas said simply. You need help, and we can help. That's enough. Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes. When was the last time someone had been kind to her without wanting something in return? I don't have any money to pay you. We're not asking for money, Thomas said. Just get better, that's all we want. 3 days later, Elena was discharged from the hospital. Thomas and Linda picked her up in their old pickup truck, and Elena was surprised by how nervous she felt. She hadn't lived with anyone except David for years, and she had almost forgotten what normal people were like. Linda was a small woman with graying hair and a warm smile. She chatted easily as they drove toward the farm, pointing out local landmarks and asking gentle questions about Elena's recovery. Nothing too personal, just enough to make Elena feel welcome. The Mitchell farm was smaller than Elena had expected, but it was neat and well-maintained. The farmhouse was old but comfortable, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under the windows. Linda showed Elena to the guest room, which was simple but clean, with a quilt on the bed and fresh flowers on the dresser. I hope you'll be comfortable here, Linda said. The bathroom is right across the hall, and the kitchen is always open if you get hungry. Elena felt overwhelmed by their kindness. I don't know how to thank you. Just rest and get better, Linda. That's thanks enough. For the first few days, Elena mostly slept. The head injury had left her with terrible headaches, and she felt weak and dizzy whenever she tried to do too much. But gradually she started to feel stronger. She would sit on the porch in the morning, drinking coffee and watching Thomas work. In the fields as she watched, Elena began to notice things. She had studied agricultural engineering in college, before she met David and gave up her career to be the perfect wife he wanted. She still remembered the principles of soil management and irrigation, and she could see that Thomas was struggling with problems that had solutions. His irrigation system was old and inefficient, wasting water that he couldn't afford to waste. The soil in some of his fields looked depleted, probably from years of growing the same crops without proper rotation. His equipment was ancient, and he was working twice as hard as he needed to because he didn't have the right tools. But Elena didn't say anything at first. She was a guest in their home, and she didn't want to seem ungrateful by criticizing how Thomas ran his farm. Instead, she tried to help in small ways. She cooked dinner sometimes, giving Linda a break. She organized the cluttered paperwork in Thomas's office, creating a simple filing system that made it easier for him to find important documents. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Thomas mentioned that he was worried about his water bill. It keeps going up, he said, but I'm not using any more water than usual. I don't understand it. Elena hesitated, then said quietly, I used to work in agricultural engineering before I got married. I couldn't help but notice that your irrigation system has some leaks. Thomas looked surprised. Engineering? Really? Elena nodded. I studied at the State University. I specialized in water management systems. She paused, then added, I could take a look at your system if you want. Maybe there's a way to fix the leaks without spending too much money. Thomas's face lit up. That would be amazing. I've been trying to figure out what's wrong for months. The next morning, Elena walked through the fields with Thomas, pointing out the places where water was being wasted. She showed him how to adjust the timers on his irrigation system and explained how different crops needed different amounts of water at different times. You're growing corn and soybeans in the same field with the same watering schedule, she said. But they have completely different water needs. You're either overwatering the corn or underwatering the soybeans. Thomas scratched his head. I never thought about that. My dad always did it this way. Your dad probably didn't have to worry about water costs the way you do now, Elena said gently. Times have changed. We have to change with them. As they worked together over the next few days, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt useful. She felt like her knowledge and skills mattered. For the first time since she had run away from David, she began to think that maybe she could build a new life for herself, and Thomas was beginning to realize that the woman he had found in his field might be the answer to problems he hadn't even known how to solve. Elena stood in the middle of Thomas's cornfield, her notebook in hand, sketching out what she hoped would be the solution to his biggest problem. It had been 3 weeks since she'd started helping with the farm, and every day she discovered something new that could be improved. But this was going to be her biggest challenge yet. You really think this will work? Thomas asked, looking at her drawings with a mixture of hope and doubt. He had been farming this land for 20 years, and his father before him for 40 more. The idea of changing something so fundamental felt scary. I'm sure it will, Elena said, though she could hear the nervousness in her own voice. The current system is wasting about 60% of your water. This new setup will cut that waste in half, maybe more. Thomas walked over to where Elena had marked out a section of the field with small flags. And you want to start with just this part? Exactly, Elena nodded. We'll treat this as a test area. If it works here, we can expand it to the rest of the farm gradually. If it doesn't work, we've only lost a small section. Elena had been thinking about this plan for days. She had calculated the water flow rates, studied the soil composition, and even researched the specific needs of the corn variety Thomas was growing. It was the most excited she had felt about anything in years. The truth was, Elena had missed using her brain this way. During her marriage to David, she had slowly stopped thinking about engineering, about solving problems, about making things better. David had convinced her that her ideas weren't important, that her education was just something to mention at dinner parties. But here on the farm, her knowledge mattered. Thomas and Linda listened to her ideas and treated them with respect. Okay, Thomas said finally, let's do it. But I have to warn you, I don't have much money for new equipment. Elena smiled. That's the beauty of this system. We can build most of it ourselves using materials you already have. I've been looking through your barn, and you've got everything we need. Over the next week, Elena and Thomas worked together every morning to build the new irrigation system. Elena had designed it to use gravity and simple timers instead of expensive pumps and complicated electronics. They used old PVC pipes that had been sitting in the barn for years, and Elena showed Thomas how to create precise holes that would deliver exactly the right amount of water to each plant. Linda often brought them lunch in the field, and she would stay to watch them work. I haven't seen Thomas this excited about farming in years, she told Elena one afternoon. He's been struggling so much lately. It's good to see him hopeful again. Elena felt a warm feeling in her chest when Linda said that. She had been so focused on her own problems for so long that she had forgotten how good it felt to help someone else. He's been really kind to me, Elena said. This is the least I can do. It's more than that, Linda said, handing Elena a glass of iced tea. You've given him something he didn't even know he needed. You've given him new ideas and new hope. As they worked, Elena began to share more of her story with Thomas. She told him about her engineering degree, about the job she had loved at an environmental consulting firm, about the research she had done on sustainable farming practices. She didn't talk about David much, but Thomas seemed to understand that she had left something painful behind. Why did you stop working as an engineer? Thomas asked one day as they were adjusting the water timers. Elena was quiet for a moment. My husband didn't think it was important. He said I should focus on being a good wife instead. She paused, then added, I guess I started believing him. Thomas shook his head. Well, he was wrong, dead wrong. What you're doing here, it's going to save my farm. Maybe save my family too. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone believe in her abilities. I just hope it works. 2 weeks later, it was clear that it was working. The test section of the field was noticeably greener and healthier than the rest. The corn plants were taller and stronger, and when Elena measured the water usage, she found that they were using 40% less water than before. Thomas was amazed. "Look at this," he said, walking through the test section. "I've never seen the corn look this good, especially not during a drought year." Elena felt pride swelling in her chest. "It's working even better than I hoped. The soil moisture is staying consistent, and the plants are getting exactly what they need when they need it." But the real test came when Thomas got his water bill that month. He opened the envelope at the kitchen table, and Elena held her breath while he read it. "Holy cow," Thomas said, his eyes wide. "The bill is 30% lower than last month." "And that's just from the test section." Linda jumped up from her chair. "Really? 30%? 30%, Thomas confirmed. "Elena, if we put this system in the whole farm, we could save thousands of dollars every year." Elena felt a surge of excitement. "We could do even more than that. I've been thinking about crop rotation, soil improvement, maybe even diversifying into some vegetables. There are government programs that help small farms transition to sustainable practices." Thomas looked puzzled. "Government programs?" "Oh yes," Elena said, pulling out her notebook. "I've been researching while you were working. There are grants for water conservation, soil improvement, even equipment upgrades. You could qualify for several of them." Thomas sat down heavily in his chair. "I had no idea any of that existed." "Most farmers don't," Elena said. "The paperwork is complicated, and it's hard to know where to start. But I could help you apply. I'm good with paperwork." Over the next few days, Elena threw herself into researching grants and programs. She filled out applications, gathered documentation, and even called government offices to ask questions. It felt good to be working towards something positive, to be building instead of just surviving. The first response came faster than expected. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers when the phone rang. Thomas answered, and Elena could tell from his voice that it was important. "Yes, this is Thomas Mitchell," he said. "Really? Are you sure?" There was a long pause. Then Thomas started grinning. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much." He hung up and turned to Elena, his face beaming. "We got it. The water conservation grant. $3,000 to expand the irrigation system." Elena felt like she might cry from happiness. "That's wonderful. With that money, we can upgrade the whole farm." "We?" Thomas asked. Elena blushed. "I mean, you can upgrade the whole farm." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You said we and you meant we. This is as much your project as it is mine now." That evening, Elena sat on the porch watching the sunset. For the first time in months, she felt like she had a purpose. She was using her skills to help good people, and she was starting to remember who she used to be before David convinced her she was worthless. Linda came out and sat beside her. "You know, when Thomas first brought you here, I wasn't sure what to think. We'd never had a stranger stay with us before." Elena looked at her, worried. "Are you sorry I'm here?" "Oh no," Linda said quickly. "Just the opposite. You've been such a blessing to us. Thomas is happier than he's been in years, and frankly, so am I. It's nice having another woman around to talk to." Elena smiled. "You've both been so kind to me. I don't know what I would have done without you." "You would have figured something out," Linda said. "You're stronger than you think you are." As Elena sat there in the gathering darkness, she began to believe that maybe Linda was right. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to start building a new life. 6 months after Elena had first suggested improving the irrigation system, Thomas was staring at numbers he could hardly believe. He sat at his kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of receipts, going over the figures for the third time. The results were the same every time he checked. "Linda, come look at this," he called to his wife, who was making breakfast. "I think I made a mistake somewhere." Linda wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "What kind of mistake?" According to these numbers, we're actually making money this year. Not just breaking even, but actually making a profit. Thomas shook his head in amazement. I haven't seen numbers like this since before Dad died. Elena looked up from her coffee, where she had been reading through a farming magazine. That's wonderful news. You've worked so hard for this. We've worked hard for this, Thomas corrected her. None of this would have happened without you. It was true. Elena's irrigation system had been expanded to cover the entire farm, and the water savings alone had cut their operating costs by almost half. But that was just the beginning. Elena had helped Thomas apply for and receive 4 different grants totaling nearly $15,000. They had used the money to improve the soil, upgrade some equipment, and even start a small vegetable operation that was selling produce at the local farmers market. More importantly, Elena had taught Thomas how to think differently about farming. Instead of just trying to grow as much as possible, they were now focused on growing efficiently and sustainably. Elena had shown him how to test his soil regularly, how to rotate crops to keep the land healthy, and how to time his plantings to get the best prices at market. I've been thinking, Elena said, setting down her magazine. Maybe we should have a little celebration. You've achieved something really incredible here, Thomas laughed. We should celebrate you. You're the one who made this possible. I just provided some technical knowledge, Elena said modestly. You did all the real work. Linda sat down at the table with them. You've both done amazing work. But Elena, you've done something else too. You've helped our whole community. Elena looked puzzled. What do you mean? Haven't you noticed how many farmers have been stopping by lately? Linda asked. Word has gotten around about what you've accomplished here. People are curious. It was true. Over the past month, Thomas had had more visitors than he'd seen in years. Other farmers from the area had been dropping by to see the new irrigation system and ask questions about the grants Elena had helped him get. At first, Elena had been nervous about talking to strangers, but gradually she had started opening up and sharing what she knew. Actually, Elena said slowly, I've been thinking about that. Yesterday, when Robert Chun stopped by with his questions about water management, I realized how much I enjoyed explaining the technical side of things. It reminded me of when I used to teach engineering labs in college. Thomas's eyes lit up. You used to teach? Just as a graduate student, Elena said. But I loved it. I loved seeing people understand something new and being able to use that knowledge to solve their problems. Well, you're teaching now, Linda said. Every farmer who comes through here leaves knowing more than when they arrived. Elena smiled. It does feel good. And I've noticed that a lot of the problems people are having are the same ones Thomas was dealing with. Simple fixes that could save them money and help their crops grow better. The next week, Elena got a call that changed everything. A woman named Mrs. Patterson from the county extension office had heard about the improvements at the Mitchell farm and wanted to meet with Elena. I understand you have a background in agricultural engineering, Mrs. Patterson said when she arrived at the farm. And I hear you've been helping local farmers with water conservation. Elena nodded nervously. I've just been sharing some basic techniques. Basic techniques that are getting impressive results? Mrs. Patterson said. I've talked to 5 different farmers who say you've helped them solve problems they've been struggling with for years. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. I'd like to offer you a position as a consulting specialist with our extension program. It would be part-time to start, and you'd be working with small farmers throughout the county. The pay isn't much, but it would give you official credentials and access to resources. Elena felt her heart racing. A real job. The first real job she'd had in years. Are you sure? I mean, I've been out of the field for a while. From what I can see, you haven't missed a beat, Mrs. Patterson said. And more importantly, you have something that a lot of technical people don't have. You understand that farming isn't just about science, it's about people. You know how to explain complex ideas in ways that make sense to working farmers. Elena looked at Thomas and Linda, who were both beaming with pride. I'd love to accept, she said. The job started the following month, and Elena threw herself into it with enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. She visited farms throughout the county, helping with irrigation problems, soil issues, and grant applications. She discovered that she had a talent for listening to farmers' problems and finding creative solutions that worked within their budgets. But more than that, she was helping people who reminded her of Thomas and Linda, hardworking families who were struggling to make ends meet, who just needed someone to show them that there were options they hadn't considered. One of her first major successes was with the Rodriguez family, who had been about to lose their farm to foreclosure. Elena helped them redesign their irrigation system and apply for emergency assistance programs. Within 3 months, they were back on solid ground financially. "I don't know how to thank you," Maria Rodriguez told Elena when she stopped by to check on their progress. "You saved our farm. You saved our family." Elena felt the same warm feeling she had gotten when Thomas's first water bill had come in lower than expected. "I just showed you what resources were available. You did all the hard work." "No," Maria insisted. "You did more than that. You believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves." As Elena drove home that evening, she thought about what Maria had said. She remembered how Thomas and Linda had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Maybe that was what she was really good at, not just the technical side of farming, but helping people see their own potential. The other major change in Elena's life came in the form of a thick envelope from a lawyer's office. Her divorce from David was finally official. She had been working with a local legal aid attorney, and the process had taken months longer than expected because David had tried to contest everything, but it was done now. She was free. Elena sat on the porch that evening, holding the divorce papers and feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the fear was finally over, that David could no longer control her life. But sadness, too, for the years she had lost and the person she had almost become. Thomas came out and sat beside her. "You okay?" "I'm free," Elena said simply. "For the first time in 10 years, I'm completely free. How does it feel?" Elena thought about it. "Scary, but good scary. Like anything is possible now." "Anything is possible," Thomas agreed. "Look what you've accomplished in less than a year." Elena looked out at the fields, green and healthy in the evening light. "Look what we've accomplished," she corrected him that weekend. Elena received a call from her extension office supervisor. "Elena, I've got some interesting news. The State Agriculture Department has heard about your work, and they want to invite you to present at the annual Sustainable Farming Conference. They want you to talk about water conservation techniques for small farms." Elena felt a familiar flutter of nerves and excitement. "A conference? In front of how many people?" "About 300 farmers, extension agents, and agricultural researchers." Elena took a deep breath. A year ago, she would have been terrified at the thought of speaking in front of so many people. But now, thinking about all the farmers she had helped and all the farms she had visited, she felt ready. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll need to prepare thoroughly, but I think I have some important things to share." That night, Elena sat at her desk in the guest room that had become her permanent home, working on her presentation. She thought about Thomas finding her in that field, about Linda's kindness, about all the farmers who had become part of her. New life. She was no longer the broken woman who had fled into the night. She had become someone who could help others, someone who had knowledge and skills that mattered. She had found her purpose, and in doing so she had found herself. 2 years after Elena had first stood on that stage at the State Agricultural Conference, she found herself back in the same auditorium, but this time she wasn't nervous. This time she was receiving an award. The State Agricultural Innovation Award goes to Elena Rodriguez for her outstanding contribution to sustainable farming practices and her work supporting small family farms throughout our region, the announcer said as Elena walked across the stage. Elena accepted the plaque with a smile, looking out at the audience filled with farmers, researchers, and extension agents. She spotted Thomas and Linda in the third row, beaming with pride. Next to them sat Dr. Peterson, the university professor who had become Elena's research partner, and Mrs. Patterson from the county extension office. "Thank you," Elena said into the microphone. "This award doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to every farmer who is willing to try something new, every family who opened their doors to help a stranger, and every community that believes in supporting each other. After the ceremony, Elena mingled with the crowd, but she kept looking for Thomas and Linda. She found them at the refreshment table, where Thomas was telling anyone who would listen about how Elena had transformed his farm. "You should have seen the place 3 years ago," Thomas was saying to a group of younger farmers. "I was about to lose everything. Then Elena showed up and changed our whole operation." "Thomas, you're embarrassing me," Elena said, walking up to join them. "I'm not embarrassing you, I'm bragging about you," Thomas replied. "There's a difference," Elena laughed. It still amazed her sometimes how comfortable she felt with Thomas and Linda. They had become the family she never knew she needed. "So what's next for you?" asked one of the young farmers. "I heard you're starting your own consulting business," Elena nodded. "I'm leaving the extension office next month to start Rodriguez Agricultural Solutions. I'll be working with small farms across 3 counties, helping them transition to sustainable practices. And I'm her first official client," Thomas added proudly. "She's going to help me expand into organic certification." The truth was, Elena's consulting business had already been operating informally for months. Word had spread about her work, and she was getting calls from farmers as far away as Iowa and Kansas. She had helped design water management systems for over 40 farms, and her techniques were being adopted by agricultural programs at 2 universities. But more than the professional success, Elena was proud of the personal relationships she had built. She had become a trusted friend to dozens of farming families, and she had learned that her real gift wasn't just technical knowledge. It was the ability to see potential where others saw only problems. A few weeks after the award ceremony, Elena was driving to her newest project when she got a call that would change everything again. A representative from the Department of Agriculture was calling about a federal grant program. "Miss Rodriguez, we've been following your work for some time," the man said. "We'd like to offer you a position leading a new initiative to help small farms adapt to climate change. It would involve traveling throughout the Midwest, training extension agents, and setting up demonstration farms." Elena pulled over to the side of the road. "That sounds incredible, but I'd have to think about it. I've just started my own business, and I have commitments to farmers in this area." "We understand," the man said. "The position wouldn't start for 6 months, which would give you time to transition your current clients. And we'd be happy to work with you to incorporate your existing business into the program." That evening, Elena sat on the porch with Thomas and Linda, telling them about the job offer. She expected them to be excited for her, but instead they both looked worried. "It's a wonderful opportunity," Linda said carefully. "But it sounds like you'd be traveling a lot." "I would be," Elena admitted. "Maybe 6 months out of the year?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "You know, we want what's best for you," he said finally. "But I have to ask, is this what you really want? Or is this just the next thing that came along?" Elena was surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been running pretty hard for the past 2 years," Thomas said. "Job, consulting, speaking engagements, research projects. When's the last time you just sat still and thought about what you actually want your life to look like?" Elena opened her mouth to answer, then realized she didn't have one. She had been so focused on rebuilding her career and proving herself that she hadn't really thought about what would make her happy. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I guess I've been afraid to slow down. Like if I stop moving, I might fall back into the person I was before." Linda reached over and squeezed her hand. "Honey, you're not the same person who showed up here 3 years ago. You can't go back to being her even if you wanted to." "But what if I make the wrong choice?" Elena asked. "What if I turn down this opportunity and regret it?" "Then you'll make a different choice," Thomas said simply. "That's the beauty of being free. You get to keep choosing." Elena spent the next week thinking about what Thomas had said. She visited several of the farms she had worked with, talking to the families she had helped. She realized that what she loved most about her work wasn't the recognition or the career advancement, it was the relationships, the sense of community, The feeling that she was part of something bigger than herself. She also realized that somewhere along the way, Nebraska had become home. Not just the place where she lived, but the place where she belonged. Elena called the Department of Agriculture the following Monday. "I'm honored by the offer," she told them, "but I've decided to stay here. I'm building something important in this community, and I'm not ready to leave it." Instead of the federal job, Elena decided to expand her local impact. She partnered with the state university to establish a research farm on land adjacent to Thomas's property. The farm would serve as a testing ground for new, sustainable farming techniques and a training center for farmers throughout the region. "You're sure about this?" Thomas asked as they walked through the field where the research center would be built. "You're turning down a lot of money and prestige." "I'm sure," Elena said. "I've learned that success isn't about how far you can go or how much recognition you can get. It's about how much good you can do for people you care about." The research farm opened a year later with Elena as its director. The opening ceremony was attended by over 200 farmers, university researchers, and government officials. But Elena's favorite moment came when she saw Thomas giving a tour to a group of young farmers, explaining how the techniques they were learning had saved his family's farm. "You know what the best part is?" Thomas was saying. "Elena didn't just help us improve our farming. She helped us remember why we love farming in the first place." That evening, as the last of the visitors left, Elena stood in the same field where Thomas had found her 3 years earlier. The corn was tall and green, growing in perfectly straight rows irrigated by the system she had designed. In the distance, she could see the lights of the research center where tomorrow she would teach a workshop on water conservation to 20 farmers from across the state. Linda came up beside her. "Any regrets?" Elena smiled. "None, well, maybe one." "What's that?" "I wish I could go back and tell that scared woman lying in this field that everything was going to be okay, that she was going to find people who believed in her work that mattered, and a place where she belonged." "I think she figured it out," Linda said. "She just needed some time to grow." Elena looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched over her that terrible night when she had fled into the darkness. She had been so broken then, so lost and afraid. Now she was strong, successful, and surrounded by people who loved her. She had found her purpose and built a life she was proud of, but most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best ones. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find out who we really are. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving too. As Elena walked back toward the farmhouse, she thought about all the farmers she would help tomorrow, all the families whose lives might change because of the work being done. Here, she thought about Thomas and Linda, who had given her a home when she had nowhere to go. She thought about the research students who would learn in these fields, and the innovations that would spread from here to farms across the country. She had planted seeds of change in this soil, and now she was watching them grow into something beautiful. The harvest was just beginning.